from the Gospel Broadcasting Network located just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Be a part of today's episode by calling in or interacting with us through Facebook. Now from Olive Branch, Mississippi, it's GBNLive.
Good evening and welcome again to GBNLive. I'm Mike Hickson. So glad to be with you this evening. We are talking tonight about the eldership, and we hope you'll stay tuned. This is going to be a great study. We need to do a lot more study with regard to those who serve as overseers in the Lord's church. And it may be that you have a question, a comment. We would be more than happy to take your questions and comments tonight. Feel free to call us at 888-805-3390. You may email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org. And so again, please, if you have a question, a comment, feel free to contact us this evening. We have with us tonight Clifton Angel, and Clifton has been on the program a number of times. And Clifton, good to be with you.
Good to be here with you as well.
Also have Cameron Freeman, and Cameron as well has been a frequent guest on the program, and so good to be with you tonight as well.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
I guess as we begin tonight, we talk about the government of the church. And God is the one who has instructed congregations today to appoint men to serve as overseers. And of course, every congregation is autonomous. Elders, their authority is only within that one congregation. But if someone were to ask you, what is an elder? How would you respond?
I guess the answer to that obviously resides within the Scripture, but to shorten that, taking from a few different passages, we see him being called a steward of God, which means that something has been entrusted to him, and also that he is to oversee, that he is to lead, that he is to feed, that being spiritually, and to take care of the church is also terminology we see in the obligations and also the qualifications of elders and those who serve in elderships.
Sure. You know, when we talk about the eldership, based upon the New Testament pattern, we always read of a plurality of men who function in the eldership. And so from that, no one elder has any more authority than another.
Right.
It's the authority rests within the plurality of men.
Amen.
Right.
And so when we look at the qualifications set forth in Scripture, and you mentioned a moment ago some of the various roles of those who would function in this capacity, do you think that we face a crisis in the church today with regard to men who aspire to be leaders?
Absolutely. You know, it's not only is a problem, but you have the extremes. We were talking just a moment about, you have the extreme of, men who have the desire, good men, no doubt, good men, but they're not qualified to be elders in the sense of what the New Testament is saying. And then maybe on the other end of the spectrum, you have men who are in the eldership or who have just been placed there, as Peter talks about, by constraint, congregation just have to feel like they need elders and they just put men into place. So you have those extremes, and neither one of those extremes is correct.
That's right.
And so, we need spiritual and godly, Christ-like men that fit the bill that we see in the New Testament who will really be shepherds.
That's right.
Overseers.
You mentioned shepherds, and prior to our program beginning tonight, you said that one of the things people would do well by way of studying this particular subject is to go back and to look at the role of a shepherd.
Right.
And do you think it's possible that over time, the role of an eldership in the minds of many envision those who function as elders as making decisions and carrying out the physical work of the church, but not necessarily understanding that the role of an elder, it's people-oriented.
Absolutely. If I might back up just a moment, to add to the crisis that you brought up, there's, first of all, we need to recognize the seriousness of the eldership and the men and the qualifications that they are to have. But along with that, we also need to get rid of perhaps the phenomena or this mindset that they are untouchable men, or that, I could never attain to that level of of a position. You know, some people are so afraid, and I think that, you know, as parents to our children, we need to rear them to respect the elders, to recognize them in the position they're in, to think highly of them. You know, many children don't see the elders or the preacher or the deacons in a good light because they leave the church building and the parents may be speaking negatively about those same leaders. And so those children are not being trained to desire those positions. And so, you know, that goes right along with you're going to have men that don't desire, or you're going to have men that desire and they're not qualified.
True. You know, as we think about the gravity of the office, and really, maybe rather than identifying the eldership as an office, maybe it would be better to refer to it as a work, because it is a work.
Absolutely.
But with regard to the seriousness of this office, Hebrews 13:17, talk a little bit about the implications of what the writer there has to say regarding the role of an eldership as well as the membership.
Well, I know in that text, that particular text, Hebrews 13, one of the common refrains in verse 7, verse 17, and verse 24 was, them that have the rule over you,
Right.
in each verse. But in verse 17, obey them that have the rule over you. And, you know, you think about that word obey. It's such a, man, it's kind of, you know, grit your teeth kind of word. You know, when people have told they need to obey or to submit or be in subjection.
That's right.
And so, but when it comes down to elders, the eldership has to have some type of authority over that local congregation so that members can obey.
Yeah, don't you think that maybe in the minds of some, the church is viewed as a democracy?
I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, you know, we're blessed to live in this nation, but there are some negative aspects to that sometimes we're conditioned to think that everything in our lives should be the same way that it is in this nation. And the church is simply not that way. That's not how God designed it. And God has put these men into their positions and given these qualifications and their obligations so that they are to make decisions. They are to have authority over their local congregations, and the members being subject to, and the elders individually are to be subject to that authority.
That's true.
I heard one elders just say recently about this very point, you know, especially with everything going on with the pandemic and everything. He said some families at this particular congregation just said, we're not going to obey the elders.
Wow.
And he said, that just struck him as so
That's frightening.
blatant, like, you know, just to think members would say something and be that bold in saying that.
Well, you know, sadly, we live in an age today where rebellion is reflected in a number of sectors in society, and so sometimes that makes its way into the Lord's church. You know, as we look at Hebrews 13:17, to me, I think one of the most sobering aspects of this verse is reflected in the fact that the writer said, they watch for your souls as they that must give an account. I understand what the writer is saying here is the eldership is responsible to God for the people under their oversight. And so, in order to be able to give an account, you have to know the flock. You know, when Jesus talked about the Good Shepherd, identifying himself as the Good Shepherd, you remember he said, the shepherd knows the sheep. So, it would be impossible to serve as an elder in the eyes of God and not know the sheep.
Right. You mentioned just a moment ago about the work of an elder being people-oriented. And, you know, even when you think about it from a practical standpoint, you know, most elders are from the area or the region where they serve as elders. And conversely, preachers more so than not come in, you know, through graduating school, a congregation needs preachers, and they travel in and travel out. So from a practical standpoint, it seems like elders would probably do a better job of being more kind of in the trenches with the members because they're from that area more so than the preacher is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You triggered a thought in my mind, and that is, you know, I think we do a great job in our brotherhood training preachers. I mean, we live here in Memphis. You've got MSOP. which has no doubt trained many, many men to serve as preachers, and some of those same men have become elders in the Lord's church.
Right.
But we really don't have any type of training program per se for men who serve as elders.
Right.
And I think, the gravity of the office, the tremendous responsibility resting upon them. Moses, for example, Moses had the opportunity to mentor Joshua.
Right.
He's identified as his assistant. And so when Moses died, God could summon Joshua to a leadership position because he was ready.
Right.
And maybe it's we as individual congregations are not training and mentoring men to serve in this capacity.
Leadership classes at our local congregations would be important, and obviously preaching on it, but the having those practical classes where you dig into the scripture, you make application of it, and encourage those young men and those young Christians and even the older ones to be looking at these things and consider them wholeheartedly, and that God needs them.
Yeah, you mentioned something a moment ago, Clifton, about some men maybe are somewhat reluctant to take on the position because it is an overwhelming position. And we're fallible people. We're not infallible. God doesn't expect perfection, but He does expect us to do the work. And so, do you think sometimes men look at the responsibilities that rest within that office and they say, you know what, I'm just not sure I want to take that on?
I would say so, yes. Certainly, one of the qualifications is that they have to have the desire, and that desire is hampered sometimes or hindered because of perhaps a misunderstanding, perhaps some false ideas or pictures that they have in their mind of who a man is to be as an elder. Obviously, we have the qualifications laid out here. Something that I have tried to point out when I teach on this subject or preach on this subject is that, when you go through those list of qualifications, there's only a few details that separates this man from any other person that is called to be a Christian.
Right. That's right. Very few.
Yes.
Very few. And I think that's a great observation. We do have a question. How do you define able to teach? Some translations say apt to teach. How is the qualification proven? And teach to whom? A group, an individual? Good question.
Well, I think the word apt there means skillful to some degree, skillful. I commonly, when I teach 1 Timothy 3 and defining that word, I use just a simple definition of ready, able, and willing. An elder must be ready to teach, able to teach, and willing to teach, but he must do so in a way that he can convey the truth of Scripture in a logical, orderly fashion, so he can try to help the person that he's trying to teach.
I know we talk about aptitude,
right?
And there's a difference in aptitude and ineptitude. And sadly, there are men who do not know the book.
Right.
But with regard to teaching, and as you look at the qualifications, when I think about a leader, and I look at 1 Timothy chapter 5, where Paul there talks about elders who rule well ought to be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine.
Right.
An elder ought to be a man who is teaching in an ongoing capacity. In other words, it's a part of his life.
Right.
One of the applications that Paul makes to Titus for the need of this man being able to teach and holding fast the word of life is so that he can be able to rebuke those who bring in false teachings and bring in discord. And he says in Titus 1:9, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able to, by sound doctrine, both to exhort and to convince or convict the gainsayers.
Yeah, and when you look at that context, there are a couple of thoughts that emerge from that. Number one, a man must be skilled in Scripture so that he can convict or encourage. But then another thought is that, there are people out here that will do, their interest is in circumventing the faith of some people. And Paul in this context talks about those who do that very thing, or were doing that very thing in the first century. And he said their mouths must be stopped. And then he goes on to say, wherefore rebuke them sharply. says to me that an elder has to be willing to, at times, be confrontational.
Yes.
Not in
a contentious way.
Yeah, but
defending the faith.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get involved in the lives of people, and that's not easy.
And even, you think about a point about being apt to teach. When Paul mentioned the different gifts to the church in Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, he said pastors and teachers. Most Bible scholars say that word suggests pastors or elders who teach.
Well, and we talk about teaching. You think about members in the congregation. There are times when you have members who are weak, some who are wayward, and it requires an elder or the elders going to those brothers and sisters and sitting down with the scriptures and talking to them about their dereliction of duty. And if that's not happening, then God's going to hold them responsible. That's a frightening thought.
I think we would look at a couple who neglects to feed their children as, just wayward parents. We would probably even call some agency. They don't feed their children, they don't take care of their children. But the same word from an application standpoint is mentioned in regard to elders. 1 Peter 5:2, feed the flock of God which is among you.
Which, by the way, in Acts chapter 20, I'm glad you mentioned that verse, because in Acts chapter 20, when the Apostle Paul called the elders from the church at Ephesus to meet with him in Miletus, you remember in verse 28, he said, take heed to yourselves and to the flock, which are overseers. And then he said, feed the church of God. And I think the mandate there is directed to the elders, that they have the responsibility of feeding the flock. Now, granted, they can ensure the flock is fed from the pulpit, the classroom, but they also have that same responsibility of making sure that they're feeding the flock.
Right. And they have to, in order to feed the flock faithfully, they have to know the book to be able to, to know, okay, is our preacher preaching the truth here? Are our teachers teaching the truth? And so,
I remember years ago Tom Holland saying that there are not a lot of problems in the Lord's church that couldn't be corrected if you had faithful elders. And as we think about their sphere of authority and their role, their work, many of us have heard about elderships recently who have decided to sit down and restudy a subject. For example, the woman's role in the church, or it may have to do with instrumental music. And typically what you hear from them after their study is, well, we've now concluded that women can have a more expanded role, or we're going to use the instrument. We don't think that's a salvation issue. If I understand Scripture correctly, no eldership has the right, the authority to change God's legislation with regard to the woman's role or the instrument or anything else.
That's exactly right. Their authority is in matters of expedience and in carrying out the authoritative commands that God has already given.
That's right.
They do not have the authority, as you noted, to change those things that God has already given.
That's right.
And it's amazing how that, the Bible it says so many different places, the word of God is settled forever, oh Lord. Just so many different places where it says God's word is complete, is final. So even when an eldership does decide to go back and restudy a particular subject or doctrine, it's not because God's word changed.
That's right.
It's always because of culture and opinion and favoring of certain teachings and areas and things of that nature have changed, but it's never because the word of God has changed.
I would find it refreshing to hear an eldership, after having restudied a subject, to come back and say, you know what, we're right. We've been following the pattern.
Yep.
And we've concluded that what we're practicing is in accordance with New Testament Christianity. I have another question that's come in. Titus 1:6 and 1 Timothy chapter 3:2, the husband of one wife currently or ever. If a man has a scriptural divorce and is now remarried, does that count as a husband of one wife? Good question.
That is a good question and a difficult one. My understanding is if that is a scriptural divorce, then he is still only married to one woman. So that would be my understanding of that.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those situations and that's one of those, real difficult questions of the New Testament. Yeah. But if God does allow for a man to remarry through a scriptural divorce, then there should be no reason why he couldn't serve as an elder, because the phrase, literally suggests, a one wife husband.
That's right.
And so, he's still legitimately married to one in a faithful marriage.
Yeah, I know of right now. I know of a very sound, good congregation that they have one of their elders who has that background, and his wife left him for another man, and so as a result of that, they divorced, and he had a scriptural divorce, and he married a woman who was biblically eligible to be married, and so he serves as an elder today, and I see no problem with that.
If I might add, according to God's word, that would be the same thing or similar to, if a man loses his wife to death, right, and then he remarries, right, everything scriptural and in order, he's still only married to one woman.
That's right.
And I think the injunction that we do understand very clearly is Hebrews 13:4. You can't be a whoremonger or an adulterer because God would judge them in those things. So
good stuff. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Please stay with us.
In our fast-paced society, we need to be able to slow down and study God's Word. What if you get the benefits of a monthly publication but not clutter your desk with more paper? If you like more digital and less paper, then we have some exciting things for you at the Gospel Journal. Not only can you find content on our Facebook page, but you can now get a digital copy of the Gospel Journal delivered to your inbox for only $12 a year. That's just $1 a month to get some sound teaching for your extra Bible study. To get your digital copy, you can shop on the Facebook page, the Gospel Journal, or visit thegospeljournal.com and start delving into God's Word today.
So how do you know whether your Bible has been corrupted? The youngest part of the Bible is about 2,000 years old. It's an old book. And it came from Greek, went into Latin, and then to English. So it's kind of like the game telephone, right? So how many of you know why we can actually trust the Bible? Anybody think it's been corrupted? Anybody want to maybe try to explain this one to us?
Thank you for tuning into GBN Live. If you have a question related to tonight's topic that you would like to have answered, please call 888-805-3390. You can also email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org. Follow us live each week, and we will do our best to get them answered on the air. Now back to the program.
Thank you for staying with us. We are back for another segment as we think about elders, their qualifications, the responsibilities of this great office, this great work. And one of the qualifications there to be above reproach. What does that entail?
I believe some of the other translations translate that as blameless, which can kind of go back to something we were talking about earlier. Sometimes we get in that mindset, well, this person has to be absolutely perfect. Well, that's not the case. All Christians, if we're to be faithful, are also to be above reproach and to be blameless, that we're not to be living in sin. If we sin, we acknowledge that and repent of it and ask God for forgiveness. But if we continue in sin, we're certainly going to bring reproach upon the church. Our conduct should not be such that we bring shame or reproach upon the Lord's church.
I think that, one of the qualifications is that those who serve are to have a good report from without. Right. Now, obviously, they need it within. Mm-hmm. But, we are a walking billboard. We ought to be. We're supposed to be salt and light, so people ought to know who we are. And if our reputation in the community has been tainted, maybe ethically speaking, we haven't lived up to a standard. If there are questions about our integrity and other things, our honesty, then those are things that reflect poorly upon a man and, in my judgment, would disqualify him.
Right.
Even when I think about the term above reproach, I was thinking like, well, he surely can't be below reproach. He has to live according to the scripture's teaching about morality for his life.
Right. That's right.
And as an example, Peter talks about, elders are examples, ensamples to the flock, 1 Peter 5:3. So he surely cannot live, I think as Clifton mentioned, just, habitual life of sin and where people can always cast or blame him for doing something, and especially if he hasn't repented of it.
Yeah. So, well, I think about here's an elder who, let's say, owns a business, and maybe he provides a service or a product, and the reputation around town is he's dishonest, or he's deceitful. I think that would disqualify a man. And we're not saying that a man has to be perfect.
Right.
But we're talking about a man who must live and walk within the footsteps of Christ, because he's our great example.
To the point that Clifton mentioned earlier, when you start looking at the qualifications, a man just has to be a faithful Christian.
That's it.
If he can understand the criteria to be a faithful Christian and bring those over into the eldership, he can understand. He can do it.
That's right. That's right.
Without feeling like he have to be perfect. Be a faithful Christian. Like you said, it shouldn't be something that's characteristic of a man. Like you said, he's known as a dishonest businessman.
Or uses bad language or whatever. What about, we talk about the qualifications that put a man in. So what if a brother who functions as an elder no longer meets those qualifications? How should that be handled?
Well, you would hope that he would recognize it, but that's not always the case, unfortunately. Then you would also hope that within the eldership, obviously the number is always 2 or more, but difficulty comes as that number grows smaller. And hopefully within the eldership, another elder or other elders as an eldership would say, look, this, brother, you need to, if there's something that can be made right, that needs to be made right, or if it's something that he's no longer qualified indefinitely for some reason, then encourage him to step down. If not, then they were going to have to remove him as a congregation and overseeing that flock. When you get down to the point of 2 men, you've got one who's unqualified and one who may still be qualified, it may be the case that the man who is qualified has to say, look, we're going.
So what about a congregation? Let's say you got 2 people serving as elders, 2 men. One has, for whatever reason, disqualified himself. Mm-hmm. But the thinking is maybe among the congregation or even the one elder who is qualified. Well, if he were to step out, then we don't have an eldership. And so let's just let it ride so that we can maintain an eldership.
Yeah. I think that's the other end of the extreme that we mentioned earlier, but I think, we don't want to miss over the fact that it's a very real possibility that a man or men in elderships can become unqualified or disqualified. You know, I think about just even in other areas of life, you know, a doctor who does things that are unethically wrong, you know, they can be disbarred.
Yeah.
And so they can be disqualified from practicing medicine.
Sure.
So a man can be disqualified or unqualified to continue to stay in the eldership. But like you said earlier, you know, sometimes as the Bible talks about in 2 Corinthians 13:5, you know, we got to examine ourselves.
That's true. That's
Elders should look into the mirror of God's word and see whether or not they are continually lining up with the qualifications. See if they're not, you know, there's no sense in holding on to a title, because that's basically what it is.
Yeah, you know, James talks about God's words like a mirror.
Yeah.
And Paul would say in 2 Corinthians chapter 13 to examine ourselves. And as you said, you know, we need to constantly be looking in the mirror, making sure that our lives are in harmony with those qualifications. I remember years ago, this has been many years ago, there was a brother who was serving as an elder in a congregation, and it was evident the people were dissatisfied with him serving. And I think there were a lot of questions about, and I never will forget, he stood up and he said, "It's evident to me the brethren have lost confidence in me. So I'll step aside." And I thought, you know, that took a lot of courage. Yeah. And I applauded him for doing that, for just willingly stepping aside. Whether he thought he was still qualified or not, the brethren decided that they thought he needed to step out, and he did. And, you know, ultimately, no one person is bigger than the church.
Right.
And we need to always put the Lord's church first, no matter what the situation. Now the questions come in. Can you be in a congregation that put in unqualified elders?
Absolutely. Yes.
It has happened, does happen.
All the time, more so than not. You know, the qualifications are there for a reason. It would be totally different if we didn't have any barometer or any gauge to look at to see what's the criteria, what's the qualifications. But God actually gave us qualifications for us to be able to see beforehand.
That's right.
You know, so that we can say, okay, does this man measure up? Does his family measure up? Is his lifestyle, does that measure up? So we can actually know. But to the question, yes, you can be in a congregation where men who are unqualified in the eldership, because sometimes they overlook the qualifications because they just want to have elders.
I suppose perhaps the person may be asking, can I continue to worship at this congregation where there may be an elder or elders who are unqualified? So perhaps that's the standpoint that they're taking. Once again, it needs to be something that would be addressed. You know, we shouldn't run from our problems. We shouldn't. It's something that we should face and we should address.
Well, I think, you know, I compare, well, the Bible compares the church to a family. We're the household of God. And when you have problems within your family, your biological family, you try to work through those and you try to seek a resolution. By the same token, in the church, I don't think the answer is to run from our problems, as you said a moment ago, but rather we need to address them and meet them head on. Now, there may come a point in time when, in all good conscience, because of biblical things, we can no longer worship at a certain place and work at a place. But that being said, as a family, we ought to try to seek some type of resolution and make it right, get things back on track where they need to be. Another question has come in. What if an elder's wife dies?
This is another one of those difficult questions. You know, the scriptures say that he is to be the husband of one wife. And legally and lawfully speaking, when his wife dies, he's no longer the husband of one wife, but he has had that, you know, he's not been an adulterer. He's not been someone who is trying to have multiple wives. And so there's a difficulty. And I know many good brethren who would contend that, you know, as long as he continues to maintain the qualifications, that he still has that wisdom and that oversight along with the other elders. And then on the other hand, I know good and godly men who would say, you know, that this says that he needs to be to have a wife, and I could see practically where that would be needed, especially if he is needing to make a visit to a single mother or something along those lines. It would be needed to have his wife with him on those occasions.
Yeah, I think the passage that would give me trouble with regard to a man staying in, well, he's supposed to be the husband of one wife. Granted, that's what the text says, 1 Timothy 3. But in Romans chapter 7, the Bible says that if the husband be dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband. And so, biblically speaking, you no longer have a spouse, as you said a moment ago. Now, I do know good men, and I'm talking about men that I highly respect, that have taken the position that an individual could continue to serve. But I think if we're going to look at what the text says, and we're going to say that we try to follow the scriptures, then how do you make the case that if a man's wife dies, he's still qualified? I don't see how, biblically speaking, he could continue to serve.
Or you could look at it from just a different angle. If a man's children die, does he still have children? Is he still, the head over his children? So you can look at it from that vantage point. So I agree with you. Once the spouse dies, as Paul says in Romans 7 repeatedly, you are loose from that law. So you, like you said, you no longer have a
Now, if a man's spouse dies and he's serving as an elder, I knew a man that his wife died. He stepped out. He eventually remarried, but he never served again. But if a brother's wife dies and he steps out and then later marries a faithful Christian woman, I know of a brother that he had been an elder and his wife died, and then he married a lady whose husband had been an elder. And so I think, he could serve again if the brethren wanted him to.
Would that not kind of fit in with matters of integrity? Like, a man who knows he no longer has a spouse, whose wife died, knows in his heart of hearts that he doesn't have a spouse.
Good stuff.
Should he willingly, step down and be honest with himself?
Yeah. Another question has come in. What if an elder's adult children become unfaithful?
Well, it's interesting that, and let me be careful how I say this. I've heard the statement, where when they get 18 or when they get 21, they're grown. Basically, as if we just take our hands off of them and just let them just, go to the wind. But I find is very striking rebuke when God told Eli,
he didn't restrain them.
You didn't restrain your children. And if we go back and look at the age to be a priest, it had to be over 20.
Yeah.
And so
25 to 50.
They were grown men.
Yeah.
And so even grown men, Eli's son, God held Eli accountable. So with that principle, I tread lightly in saying, well, once they just become grown, that, hey, they're no longer under my care, my supervision. I don't think that's the proper way to interpret that, because they're even today.
Well, I had a brother tell me, and I have never forgotten it. He said, you really don't know what kind of job you did as a parent until they leave home. I thought, makes a lot of sense. When they're under your roof,
kind of made to do it.
The golden rule applies. The man with the gold rules. But, when they leave home, and another, I think, question that I would raise is this, if you have unfaithful children, let's say, you've got 3 children and they're unfaithful and they're adults, and you have parents with young children and they come to you and say, look, we're having trouble with our children. Or maybe they have adult children and they say, what advice can you give us to get them back on track? I just think it puts you in a very
difficult
awkward
spot.
position.
And I guess to go along with this and kind of to give the different point of view from this is that culturally, the way we are today is the mindset, okay, they're 18, they're adults, and even the children have that mindset, okay, I'm I'm leaving home, and I'm on my own. And so there does enter into that. They have decisions to make.
That's true.
They can allow influences in their lives to where, they are trained differently than what their parents have actually trained them. And so there's a great difficulty there to just say cut and dry, this man's unqualified because his adult children have.
Yeah, and I think about also, one of the qualifications going back to, here's a brother who has good report from without. You mentioned Eli. And, if your kids, whether they're in the home or even if they're grown, if they're casting a bad reflection on you and your family, then ultimately that falls back on the church.
Yeah.
And so I would think that you would not want to do anything to deter from the integrity of the Lord's church.
And you were speaking from a cultural standpoint, and even now, I think within the last 5 or 10 years, most 18 to 24 to 25-year-olds are not even leaving home now.
Yeah.
So they're graduating from college and moving back home.
That's true. That's true. That's a good point. We are going to take a final break. We'll be back, and so we hope you'll stay with us. And we look forward to being back and concluding our study tonight.
Hi, I'm Kevin Rhodes, the host of Expositions on GBN and the director of the Brown Trail School of Preaching in Bedford, Texas. We offer a 2-year intensive program at Brown Trail with a curriculum designed not only to teach the entire Bible, but also to prepare men with all the skills needed to work as gospel preachers. Skills ranging from preaching sermons to teaching Bible class, from learning to work in Greek and Hebrew to knowing how to work with elders and congregations, from doing sound exegesis to creating expository sermons, from working in radio and television to writing blogs and more. With a diverse and experienced faculty at Brown Trail School of Preaching, we believe in building knowledge, building skills, building character, building preachers. For more information, you can find us on the web at wementorpreachers.com.
Hallelujah, and the glory, revive us again.
I never checked to see if the things I'd always believed were in there. So test everything.
We examine videos that teach religious error, and we expose that error in the light of the Bible, because we believe when we are dealing with matters as important as one's eternal salvation, you can't afford to be wrong.
Jesus basically said that the only way that you're going to go to hell is over his dead body, so to speak. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, people say that, over my dead body. Yeah, literally that's what he did.
You can watch the latest episodes after tonight's show. To find out more, visit GB.
Thank you for staying with us. We are back for our final segment as we try to wrap things up tonight. What about how men can begin the process of qualifying themselves to serve? What are some steps that they could begin taking so that when the time comes, they can step up to the plate?
I think one of the things to do that I know that I was taught being a new Christian, young Christian man was always remember your influence. remember your influence. Start studying early as possible. You mentioned earlier that, you know, we really don't have any like training schools or things of that nature for elders. So, you know, one of the things, you got to start studying the word earlier so you can get it, you know, ingrained in you and living the life. And I think you mentioned 2 or 3 times, Clifton, was that, you know, all of these qualifications are really requirements for a Christian
right.
life. Start applying, you know, the scriptures to your life as a Christian and let that become a part
Yeah,
of
you know,
your
if you look at
character.
those qualifications, a Christian ought to meet, you know, it may be that a person's not married, but it might be that they will become married.
Right.
Person doesn't have children, but they may have children one day. And then the third would be not a novice. And we all begin as a novice, but so as you said, you know, ultimately, we all ought to be trying to acquire these qualifications.
Goes back to the importance of training our children. You know, parents need to be, even parents who may not be, you know, a man that may not be an elder himself. He may be a deacon, but he needs to be preparing himself for the possibility, if he has the other qualifications there, and may have more of them as time comes, to be able to step into that role at some point, but also to train his children and his sons and his daughters to be the ones who would, you know, sons to be the type of men that would be elders, daughters who would be the type of girls, ladies who would marry men who would be elders and other things. So I think it's important to train them young also.
And I think to encourage our young men to aspire to be leaders in the Lord's church, to preach, to teach, and to our young ladies, to encourage them to marry men, because, you know, the wife is she plays an important role in that process. And so for her to encourage him to serve as an elder, to serve as a deacon. Let me ask this question. I remember years ago, I had a friend of mine that had been in the military, and he was a leader. I mean, he was very aggressive. And I remember a member saying to me one time that, you know, because of his military background, he was always out front, and sometimes way out front with the elders back here. Sometimes within a congregation, you have some people who, because of their personality, they tend to be out in the front. And then sometimes you have some people that, you know, they're not nearly as aggressive. And so, you know, like in the book of 3 John, we read about Diotrephes who love to have the preeminence. So how do you deal with, or how does an eldership deal with a man who has that, you know, maybe he's developed the reputation of kind of being the head guy or whatever. I think about the brother that I knew at one time. He's deceased now. Good man. But, you know, sometimes men get that reputation, and so how can you overcome that?
I think one good way, as we talk about, you know, the elders or the eldership is a plurality of men. So I think sometimes when elders meet, when they convene, when they get together, they need to figure out a way to balance out personality types. Because if you're always putting the strong personality guy up front, he's always the one making the decisions, making the announcements, saying this is what we're going to do, he's going to be, you know, vilified.
Yeah, you know, kind of the go-to guy, which, you know, and it may be that through no fault of his own, people just go to him. But you know, sometimes you have guys who are somewhat freelancers. You know, they start making decisions on their own without the eldership. And so how do you rein that in?
I would say that hopefully he would recognize that, and he needs to have the mindset, okay, if someone asks him a question or, you know, about a decision that needs to be made by the eldership, hopefully he would say, let me speak with the other elders, and I will get back to you on that. But if he develops the mindset that he can make those decisions without going to them, then somehow that needs to be addressed, whether that's within the eldership, you know.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I knew a man that was an elder, and a problem had surfaced among some of the young people, and rather than getting the eldership, he addressed it on his own with a couple of family members. And it cost him as an elder. He had to step aside because, and I thought, had he gotten the other elders involved, he would not have put himself in such a predicament. And I'm not trying to impugn his motives or anything like that, but it was just a poor decision. And one of the things of an elder, you need to have some wisdom in how you deal with things.
And another thing you have to be careful about when you have one kind of imposing figure is that he kind of sets himself apart from everyone else. Members oftentimes can use that distinction against him and also against the rest of the elders.
Sure.
So they say, okay, well, we know who the weak ones are. We also know who's the strong one, so we know who not to go to. And we know who to go to.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
another question, must an elder have more than one child?
I'm forgetting the passage, but I know that there are passages that refer to someone who had one child, but it was referred to as children. And so
Isaac.
Isaac? Okay.
Yeah. You remember Abraham and Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
They had Isaac, but the reference was to children.
Yeah.
I think one brother made a good analogy. He said, man, if you only had one child, your firstborn, and somebody came and said, everybody with children, raise their hand, would you keep your hand down?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. If somebody, in Ephesians chapter 6, when Paul said, and you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Does that only apply to fathers that have more than one, one child? Well, of course not, And so I think that's a good question. What about, one of the qualifications is given to hospitality. Brother Mosher said one time that qualification means he's a people person. How important is it to be a people person?
I think it's very important. I think one of the definitions I saw for that was he must be a lover of strangers. And I think about the Good Samaritan in that regard, being hospitable. But one of the things that kind of helped me realize that 1 Timothy chapter 3, when he talks about a father's role with his house, does that not also include hospitality to his wife and his children and his home, being a people person? A lot of times we look at it as like he got to rule over his house, but no, he has to be hospitable to those in his house as well. And so That's a man who's raised children understand you have to be hospitable to your children.
Yeah. Good stuff. I think that what we've been talking about tonight from a practical standpoint is helpful. But then, as you look at those qualifications and the importance of the job, one of the roles of an elder is to protect the sheep. Paul addressed that with the Ephesian elders because apostasy would occur from within.
Right.
And in this day and time, there are a lot of folks that, quite frankly, don't know the Bible as they should. Sadly, sometimes elders don't. There was a day and time when if a preacher got in a pulpit or if somebody got in a pulpit and said something that contradicted Scripture, an elder would follow them into the pulpit and say, oh, wait a minute. And so going back to how important is it for men to know the book?
I think it's vital. And once again, every Christian should be striving to continue to grow in their knowledge of God's Word and studying God's Word. But certainly these men that we that are ordained into these positions should, or these works, should be men of the book, men who hold fast to the Word of life, Paul says to Titus, which they have been taught. And so they continue faithfully in it, and they continue to be reminded of those truths. Peter said as long as he lived that he was going to continue to remind his brethren of the truths, even though they were established in them. And so, it's important for elders even to be reminded of truths that they've been taught before.
That's right. As we look at the roles of elders and deacons, their role can entail the physical and the spiritual realm. And I see a combination there. But with regard to the elders, their role is spiritual in nature.
Spiritual.
Do you think it's possible sometimes that elders get bogged down doing the work of what I would call a deacon,
Absolutely.
the physical realm.
It's often been said that far too often elders are doing the work of deacons and preachers are doing the work of elders, and we need to get back to the pattern that we have in the Scripture.
So why do you think it is sometimes elders get more, maybe get caught up in what color the walls are, what color the carpet is? You know, they get caught up in the physical and not delegate that
Right.
to deacons or to other qualified men in the congregation.
You know, I think a lot of times, and you know, it may not be nothing that's, you know, intentionally bad, but the word overseer, you know, sometimes we have a tendency to think that word means just, I'm an overseer, I'm over everything,
Yeah.
I make sure everything gets done. But the key word you said was being able to delegate.
Yeah.
One of the things Jethro told Moses was, man, you're going to burn yourself out. You're going to wear yourself thin. You got to delegate. And so I think elders, you know, have to recognize that, you know, they can still be considered elders.
That's right. Well, you know, you know, I know sometimes, you know, they like to be involved in it because they want to make sure things are being done correctly and whatever. And they're also interested in the spiritual side, or they're concerned about the spiritual side. But I look at it like this, you know, it's not that they're too good to sweep floors and to paint buildings and to lay carpet and everything, but, you know, we need their time in the spiritual role. If you had a guy that went to medical school as a brain surgeon and you hired him at a hospital, you wouldn't want him out here sweeping your floors. Not that he's too good to sweep floors, but
His specialty.
that's right. You want him in the role that you hired him for, because that's where he excels. And I think that's what, you know, elders, we need them in the role that God designed them for. By way of conclusion, we've got about a minute left. What would you say to congregations today with regard to elders?
Stick with the book and, you know, encourage their elders. Think highly of them. You know, Paul writes that to the church at Thessalonica, that we need to respect them and encourage them, and also show that same attitude to our very own children. And go back to what the Scriptures say in all things.
That's right. That's right.
What I would say is the fact that God put elders in the local congregation for a reason. And so, you know, every congregation, every person that may be listening, may be watching the broadcast, need to realize the significance of having an eldership in their local congregation. And as the Hebrew writer says in those 3 verses, to remember and obey and salute them.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you know, elders are a blessing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I am grateful to God for good elders. I'm grateful that I have men that will stand behind me when I preach the gospel. And, you know, their encouragement to me is preach the word.
Amen.
I appreciate that. Thank you for being a part of our program tonight. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show. We hope to be back here again next week. Until then, God bless.
This has been GBN Live. Thank you for watching.